format, not that what I will say will probably be too helpful. The first part of the exam is a true-false section. It will have 25 questions, and again, you are able to explain your answer should you so choose to do that. The exam is based upon what's in class, what we've done in class, and the class notes, not on the textbook, even though they obviously are much the same. But in other words, I'm not extracting questions out of the textbook on the exam. It's just what has gone on in class here. So the first section, yes?
Sorry, I have a question about that. There are some sections that we have in our notes, but you didn't go over in class, so they're left blank. Should we go to our textbook and fill them out?
No.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to, yeah, but not for the exam. Okay. You know, anything that we have not covered in class, or I have pointed, I'm not going to hold you accountable on the exam for it. Okay. Thank you. Hopefully, the notes might prove helpful to you later on in your own studies. And so, like with Deuteronomy, there's all kinds of stuff in there that we included on Deuteronomy that, you know, you're not responsible for it, at least for the exam. So the second section will be simply for you to list the foundational books and the key words. It won't be the chart, but it will just be a listing of those. The third section is, I don't even know why I put it in here, multiple choice, but there's only 5 of them, and it's only worth 5 points. I don't know why I did that, but I did. Then comes the fourth section is fill in the blanks, and that's worth 20 points. Then we have discussion questions, which are about 40 points. And one of those is on the Abrahamic covenant. That's the one that is 20 points, so it's basically 1/5 of the exam is your full discussion of the Abrahamic covenant. And one of the things that might prove helpful is to just go back and read the textbook. There are 5 pages in the textbook, I believe, that are devoted to the Abrahamic covenant. So. And then there's a couple of other short answer type questions under discussion, which I will not talk about. But any questions about the questions? Okay, probably wasn't too helpful, at least you get the idea to some extent. Okay. We find ourselves on page 38 of the notes. Backing up just a step, Joshua replaces Moses. There was a public ceremony involving Moses and Eleazar, who was the high priest then, to confirm the transition of power from Moses to Joshua. And that was done in such a way that it is clear to everyone that Joshua is now the next ruler. To Joshua, God gave 2 basic assignments. One, he was to make sure that these fortified cities, the strongholds of the Canaanites, were neutralized, they were destroyed. Because once that happened, then it was possible for any individual tribe to take care of the Canaanites in their territory, because Joshua had deprived them of their fortresses. So that's the first thing. The second thing was the division of the land. And so Joshua, in fact, did fulfill all of what God told him to do. So now taking a look at the dividing up of the land. It actually, of course, was not done all at once. The first step, if you wish, was actually under Moses, and it was done on the east side of the Jordan before they ever got into the land, and that was dividing up the eastern area. So when they crossed over, the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh asked to have this territory. Moses was a little reluctant because between the east and the west was the Jordan River, which in that day would have been a little bit of a barrier, and all of the center for the worship of the Lord would be on the west side. First at Shiloh, where the tabernacle would be set up, and then later, after David established Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, obviously then the temple is built there, and that becomes the center. So Moses was not real keen with the idea, but God said, go ahead and let them do it. However, Moses was clear to them, look, you guys understand, you can't be setting up altars and places of worship on your side of the river. There's only going to be one place where you can worship the Lord. That's at the tabernacle, and then, of course, later on it would be the temple. So the first 2.5 tribes ended up on the east side, though Moses was a tad bit reluctant in letting this happen. So the second time, there was some tribal divisions in Joshua 14, where Joshua divided up, but there were still some tribes that didn't have a tribal area that was spelled out. And so we come to Joshua chapter 18, where they are at Shiloh. And Shiloh is the place where the tabernacle would be set up. And Shiloh really became the religious and / political capital of the nation of Israel. And it was that way for about 375 years. So when this is Shiloh. So in 23, which was our last trip to Israel, they've done a lot of archaeological work, and it is ongoing today. And they feel that this area, the flat area, which is one of the few flat areas there, it's very hilly, that this is most likely the place where the tabernacle and the buildings built with the tabernacle were set up. And it's interesting that even recent, this picture doesn't show it, but to the right of down that hill a little bit, they found huge deposits of bones, animal bones, indicating this was in fact a place of sacrifice. And so they even now have come to the place where they feel they know exactly where the Holy of Holies would have been located there. Unfortunately, though we were planning on going back in March, next March, we have had to cancel. We just, unfortunately, I understand people are uncertain about going over to Israel. It's really perfectly safe there. There's always trouble in the Middle East. So at any rate, this was Shiloh. And what most people don't know is that this was the center of Israel's life for over 3 centuries. And they know nothing about Shiloh. They know tours to Israel rarely ever, until recently, started going to Shiloh. This is, quote, in the West Bank area. It's about 30 miles north of Jerusalem. The first time we went there in 2020, was it? Yeah, 2020. We took a bus up, an armored bus. It was like a tank. bulletproof windows. It was in fact reinforced armor on this bus, because that is, quote, West Bank. And while they didn't have any shootings when we were there, they did have some in the past. So they're just taking precautions. Last time, it wasn't the case. But it's a fascinating area that they've uncovered so much, even just in the last couple of years, about Shiloh. So it is there that Joshua set up the tabernacle, where Israel's political government was located. This is where Samuel, a little boy Samuel, would have been taken. And but what we don't see here, what we don't usually think of, is that they put the tabernacle up, which was a portable worship center, but once they got to Shiloh, they're not going anywhere. And so what they did was to build permanent walls and facilities. That's why you read in 1 Samuel that Samuel, little guy, would get up in the morning, or young man, whatever he was at the moment, and he would open the doors of the tabernacle. And where did he sleep when he's there? Well, they had permanent structures that they built there. The tabernacle wasn't going anywhere now. So the tabernacle would eventually, the Ark of the Covenant would be taken. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then the Philistines eventually invaded and burned a lot of it, but some of it was rescued and taken elsewhere, and David eventually got it all back together again. So anyway, Shiloh is a fascinating place, and we enjoyed our time there. Now, so the land is now distributed amongst the 12 tribes, and it's now going to be the responsibility of each tribe to root out the Canaanites, to destroy them in their area. So here we have the birth order of the 12 sons of Jacob, beginning with Reuben, number 1, and Benjamin, number 12. The tribal areas within Canaan that were divvied up are a tad bit different than the birth order, starting with Levi. Levi, if you look on the right side, there is no tribal land given to the Levites. Instead, they got 48 cities. And this is all spelled out as to where these cities are located. It's not random. What God did was to put these cities throughout the land, even on the east side of the Jordan. And 6 of those 48 cities were what were called cities of refuge. And they were for one reason, and that is for those who were guilty of unpremeditated murder. So if a person did something that accidentally caused the death of another, they could flee to a city of refuge, and they would stay there. They had to stay there until the high priest died. So you hope the high priest was really old and would knock off pretty soon, and then you could be released. So, for example, you and I are out in the woods, and I'm getting some winter firewood, and I'm chopping away, and the axe head flies off, and it hits you and kills you. Now, in those days, you didn't call the police, so there wasn't any. You didn't have a standing army. So what do you do with the death of an individual? Well, the answer is the family took care of it. So you have blood avengers now who can go out. So let's say that I did that and I accidentally killed you, and you're as dead as if I had premeditated it, but you're dead. So what happens next is that your family members would then seek to get rid of me because I had killed one of their family members. And so the avengers of blood would be, and if they found me and put me to death, there's no repercussions to that. So how do you sort this thing out? The cities of refuge, there were 6 of them, 3 on the east side, 3 on the west side, and I would go there, and I would be quizzed and interrogated when I came. This is a Levitical city. And they would interrogate me about what happened. And if I could convince them that it was an accident, I didn't do it on purpose, then they would allow me to live in their city. But if I should venture out of the city gates and some of the blood avengers are waiting for me and kill me, that's on me. I've got to stay within the city until the high priest dies. When he dies, then I am free to go. And nobody can legally harm me or do anything to me. So those Levitical cities were there for that reason, but also, as we mentioned before, who were the final arbitrators of the law? The priests. So you needed priests nearby, because you can't go online and find out a priestly opinion. You've got to go to a place where the priests are located. And so if I have seen maps of the 48 cities, and you can see that no matter where you lived in the land of Israel, you're within a few miles of one of these cities. So it's not a big deal to get priestly interpretation. The other tribe that's affected is that of Joseph, because remember that according to 1 Chronicles, the birthright was given to Joseph, which means he got a double portion of the land, which is why you always read in the Old Testament about Ephraim and Manasseh. You don't read about Joseph 1 and Joseph 2. It's by the names of his sons. So the tribes are now have gotten their land area. They have gone out and they know exactly which forest, which rock formation, which stream is the border of their land. So once that happens, now Asher knows where they are to live, and they also know that it is that land area that they are responsible for as far as purging it of all of the Canaanites. So Joshua has done his job. The land is now divided up. So we are now here at the theocracy. Taken a long time, but we now have people, law, and land. But the theocracy period lasts over 3 centuries, but there's not much there as far as the text is concerned. You do have Ruth, and you do have the first 6 chapters of 1 Samuel. So now we're headed into the theocracy. And again, I want you to take note of what's not there. There is no transition ceremony when Joshua dies or right before he dies, handing off centralized ruling authority to somebody else. No prime ministers, no presidents, no kings. So it is going to be the rule of God over Israel. And they have God's law. They have a constitution. They know what their king wants of them. It's written out in the law code. So the most important people in the theocracy period, the most important human beings, are the priests, and particularly the high priest. The judges are there, but they are emergency type individuals. They really are only there because of failure, and only there because you need someone in light of the failure to bring about military success. If it wasn't for Israel's failures, there probably would not have been any judges appear on the scene at all, because when it comes to judging the people as far as the law is concerned, it's the priests and Levites who do that. So, we're going to take a very quick stroll through the theocracy now. There's not a whole lot to really say. Now, in the quiz, we've already gone over this, but judges and kings did not have the same kind of authority. They just are not the same. Here are the differences. First of all, power and authority. Kings had far more power. They could have a standing army. They could levy taxes on the people. They could make all kinds of demands on the people that the judges never could. Even the greatest of the judges, which is probably Samuel, still did not have the kind of authority that Saul had as far as having an army and raising taxes and that kind of thing. Secondly, they're different as far as the area that they governed. In fact, when you look real carefully at the detail of the book of Judges, you discover that there were judges, sometimes more than one judge ruling at a time. Why? Because no judge, not one, ever ruled over all of Israel or judged all of Israel. They were located in isolated areas depending upon their military victory over whoever was subjugating Israel. So they had less territory. And again, no judge ever was over the entire area. Closest was Samuel. But even Samuel, his travels were limited to a certain area. Third, there was a difference in how the office was passed on. The reality is the office of judge was not passed on. Now, apparently, there was a time or two where a judge attempted to give judgeships to their own children, but that apparently did not fly. But with kings, it's a different matter, isn't it? The king would be succeeded by his son, or who the king delegated. So there is a rather significant difference. Now, as far as the kings, the second point in the area governed, in the monarchy period, only 3 of the kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, ever ruled over the whole nation. So the other 40 kings were limited in the area that they ruled, Judah or Israel. So judges were temporary, emergency type individuals who, if Israel had behaved themselves, would never have been used. So, this period covers over 300 years, and it was sort of a depressing period of time. The key word is, of course, defeat. Now, I want us to take a look at, when we come now to the book of Judges, on page 40, the top of page 40, we have some scriptures listed which help us to fill in the blanks. And the first one is Psalm 106. And Psalm 106 and verse 34. Psalm 106 is sort of a walk through the Old Testament. But when we come to verse 34, we're now talking about the theocracy in the period of the judges. They did not destroy the peoples as the Lord commanded them. So this section on the judges starts off with the unfortunate truth that they didn't obey God. They did not do what Deuteronomy 7 told them to do, which was to destroy the Canaanites. They did not destroy the peoples as the Lord commanded them, but they mingled with the nations, learned their practices, and served their idols, which became a snare to them. They even sacrificed their sons and their daughters to the demons, and shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and their daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan. And the land was polluted with the blood. So it's not an isolated point, rarely happening. This is what occurred with regularity. Thus they, Israel, became unclean in their practices and played the harlot in their deeds. They did exactly what God told them not to do, and that was they let the Canaanites live. The result was they began to embrace Canaanite religion, which also involved child sacrifice. And so the writer of Psalm 106 correctly identifies the idols as demonic beings. Paul does the same thing in 1 Corinthians 10. So in the days of Judges, we are told they actually were involved in sacrificing their own children to the various Baals and Ashtoreth of the Canaanites. And so everything that God warned them about, in fact, took place. So Psalm 106 is very instructive because it lets us know that of the consequences of disobeying God. They sacrificed to the demons. They sacrificed their own children. Deuteronomy 7, we don't need to go through. That's the two commands that God gave to Israel. In your notes, I have a scripture that's not on the slide, but the one in Joshua chapter 24, the last part of the book of Joshua, it reads this way, and it answers the question, how long did it take them to get into Canaanite worship anyway? And it came about, this is Joshua 24:29, it came about after these things that Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in the territory of his inheritance, which happened to be in the tribe of Ephraim. And verse 31, and Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived, or many days after Joshua, and had known all the deeds of the Lord which he had done. So, as long as Joshua was alive, and some of the key leaders of Israel who were with Joshua, the nation was okay. But when those died off, and we are looking at maybe a decade at the most, when these men died off, that's when you have Israel beginning to descend into a level of failure. The first judge is going to be a guy by the name of Othniel. And Othniel, I think, was a cousin of Caleb. Well, Caleb puts us into the conquest, and that indicates you're not talking about a long period of time before Israel needs a judge to deliver them. The last scripture to mention, which is one I would advise you to include in your paper, because it's one of those hinge verses that redirects the storyline. Allow me to start with verse 27, Judges chapter 1. Manasseh did not take possession of Bet-shean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages. So the Canaanites persisted in that land. So just talking about the half-tribe of Manasseh on the west side, they did not get rid of the Canaanites in these following cities. The Canaanites continued to exist. But verse 28 is the verse. And it came about when Israel became strong that they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely. Well, when is it that Israel became strong anyway? Because God had said there are 7 nations that are stronger than you in the land. Well, the answer would be when Joshua finished off the last of the fortified cities. Now, the playing field is level, but Israel is now much stronger than any of these nations which have been deprived of their fortresses. So, Israel now is dominant over any of the Canaanites. And so, consistently, the Israelites looked out at the land, at their territory, and saw Canaanites who could be put to work. You know, here's a guy, he's been given a land area, and he goes out to his field, he's going to plant a crop or whatever, and there's all kinds of rocks in his field, there's shrubbery that needs to be cut, and he's thinking, this is a lot of work. Hey, look at those 2 Canaanite guys over there, early 20s, strong guys. You know what? I don't think I'm going to kill them. I'm going to have them take the rocks out of my field and cut down the shrubbery and so on. And again, if you look at the end of Judges 1, that's exactly what they did. They put them to forced labor, and that way they got all kinds, they could sip their iced tea in a hammock while these guys are out there working. So that's what they did. That's why Judges 1:28 is a significant verse, because it just screams disobedience to Deuteronomy chapter 7. Well, the result is that being strong, even though when they were strong, the Canaanites now began to infect them morally and spiritually. And God had told them, you don't make covenants with these people, but that's exactly what they did. So, that brings us to Judges chapter 2, which is a summary of 300 years. This makes it easy on writing papers. You get to look at Judges chapter 2. Chapter 2 and verse 11. And the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed themselves down to them. Thus they provoked the Lord to anger. So they forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtaroth. So Baal would be the word for the male deities. The Ashtaroth, sometimes called the Astartes, would be the female deities. And the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he gave them into the hands of plunderers, who plundered them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies around them, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had spoken. It's not like God hadn't told them what would take place. And as the Lord had sworn to them, and so they were severely distressed. Then the Lord raised up judges who delivered them from the hands of those who plundered them. And yet they did not listen to their judges, for they played the harlot. And by the way, that's the terminology that you find throughout the prophets, that Israel, and later Judah, were harlots. And the idea of a harlot in the Old Testament is not exactly the same idea we have of a prostitute. A harlot in the Old Testament was a woman who was married to her husband and was unfaithful to her husband. She played the harlot. And so, like when we get to the book of Revelation and you have the great harlot, knowing that helps determine who this harlot will be. So, they played the harlot after other gods and bowed themselves down to them. They turned aside quickly from the way in which their fathers had walked in obeying the commandments of the Lord. They did not do as their fathers. And when the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. Why? The Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who oppressed and afflicted them. But it came about when the judge died that they would turn back and act more corruptly. So it's not just a cycle, it's actually a descending spiral. Act more corruptly than their fathers in following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not abandon their practices or their stubborn ways. So, this short portion that I just read out of the book of Judges summarizes 330 years or thereabouts. That's what the book is about, this. So, the cycle is this. They are serving the Lord, first with Joshua, and then Joshua died and the elders died. And so they served the Lord, and then they turned from the Lord. They went after other gods, generally the Baals and the Astartes. So they are now into idolatry with all of what that brings. Then what happens is that the Lord brings in a foreign nation or people group. Could be from Mesopotamia, could be from Edom, but he brings them in from various places, and they now subject God's people. And that was never fun, because they would tax them, they would take their crops, they would take their animals, they would just make life miserable. Finally, the people of Israel became so miserable that they would cry out to the Lord, "Oh, Lord, we are so sorry for what we have done. Please forgive us." And God says, okay. He raises up a judge. He uses all kinds of different methods to do it. And the judge now will come along, and he will be the deliverer, and the judge will defeat the enemy, and they will return to the Lord, and they will serve the Lord. Then the judge dies. And quickly they go after other gods. And God brings in a foreign nation. And the foreign nation is abusive, subjects the people, does all kinds of things. Life is miserable. And finally they cry out to the Lord. Oh, Lord, we are so sorry for what we have done. And God raises up a judge. The judge delivers the people, and they return back to the Lord and back to serving the Lord. And then the judge dies, and they go back into idolatry. And God brings in a foreign people, subjugates them, and life is miserable for them. And finally they get so miserable that they cry out, oh, Lord, we are so sorry for what we have done. God says, okay, raises up a judge who delivers them militarily, usually, and they return back to the Lord, and they serve him. And then the judge dies, and they go into idolatry. And God brings in a foreign nation and subjugates them, and they're miserable. They get so miserable, they finally say, oh, Lord, we are so sorry for what we have done. God says, okay, raises up a judge who delivers them. They go back to serving the Lord, and then the judge dies. You got the idea, do you? Okay.
And this whole thing lasted 300 years?
Yeah, this went on for 300 years. 300 years. Yeah. That's why when we learn that Othniel is the first judge, that's significant because he's related to Caleb, which puts it right after the conquest of the land. So when the text says they departed quickly, it means it. There wasn't a lot of time that goes by. So, but it is so typical, is it not, that the spiritual dynamic that one generation may have is not automatically, and never is, passed on to the next. So this is, in fact, the cycle of the judges. This is the story of 300 plus years of the existence of Israel, which partially explains why Judges, which is the same length of Joshua, covers over 300 years. Joshua covers 30 years. It's pretty clear that God's in a hurry to tell the story here because there just ain't much to tell on this one. So finally, we will come to Samuel, who's the last of the judges, but boy, did he have a mess, because remember what the text says. It wasn't just a cycle, it was actually, they acted more worse than the previous one. So it's more of a descending spiral. Now, when you look at the era of the theocracy, we know about 14 judges. Could there have been others? Maybe, but I would not think so. 14 of the judges, and then there's a total of 12 in the book of Judges. Eli, who is a priest, and Samuel are the last two, and they are found in the book of 1 Samuel. So, you have some of these judges that are mentioned in here, and some we have information about them, a good bit of information, and others not so much. For example, at the end of Judges 3, and after him, came Shamgar, the son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad, and he saved Israel. That's it. That's all we know about Shamgar. Now, I want to meet some guy. I want to know about a guy who takes a pointed stick, basically, an ox goad and kills 600 Philistines with it. I mean, that's a man's man for sure. That's toxic masculinity there. Really. Anyway. But why we aren't told more about Shamgar? I want to know more about Shamgar. So what we do know, though, is about 3 of them. But first, Israel was guilty of apostasy. And what is apostasy? It's a term that's used in the New Testament. It's actually a Greek word. But it means a departure. That's basically what apostasy is, a departure. And as it's used here, as we're using it here, it is a departure or a willful turning away from the truth of God. It's not a mistake. It's not an error. When people apostatize, they know what they are doing. So the Apostle Paul warned about this, particularly in the last part of the last days. There is going to be apostasy. The church knowingly turns away from the truth of God. And we do seem to be seeing some of that, don't we? So it's a willful turn, and that's what Israel in the days of the judges was guilty of, a willful turning away from God. Now, in the book of Judges, 3 judges are emphasized, and probably they are most familiar to you. My guess is that if I had asked the class, who is Shamgar, that none of you would say, oh, he's that cool dude with an ox goad that killed 600 Philistines. But we do know a few of them by name, one being Gideon, and God called Gideon to defeat the Midianites. And actually, he was a prime candidate because the Midianites had killed Gideon's brother. And you'd think he'd want a little bit of revenge. And Gideon, of course, is the guy that they didn't have an army, okay? There was no army. So if you were going to be a deliverer, you had to raise an army. And so Gideon does that, but you know, Uncle Gideon wants you, and he's trying to get people recruited. We're going to go after the Midianites, and so Gideon, not bad when you think about it, was able to get 32,000 people. 32,000, but the problem was the Midianites were 135,000, which the odds aren't really great at that point. And yeah.
They would have had, each person would have had to kill 450 soldiers.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. I'm glad to know that. Well, that's probably what explains what happens next, because Gideon says, anybody who's afraid can go home. I'm afraid. I'm out of here. 22,000 out of the 32,000 go home. Down to 10,000. Now it's 1 versus 13 and a half. You know, odds, 135. So, God says, that's just too many people. And Gideon says, run that one by me again. What do you mean, too many people? And that's the famous going to the spring and having them lean down and get a drink of water, and whether they stick their face in or bring the water up. The guys who brought the water up are more alert, I guess, and there are only 300 of them. That's kind of cool because they have now developed that whole area, and for a while Gideon's spring was not running, but it does now. So we always have to go there and lap water, you know. So, but anyway, so he has 300, and then he gets the battle plan. Go at night and surround them. Okay, 300 surrounding 135,000. Got it. Now, what you do is you blow your trumpets, and you have a little clay pot with a lamp inside, and then you smash that and poof, fire will come out. And so they do that. They blow the trumpets, 360-degree surround sound, smash the lights. All of a sudden, it looks like, I mean, there must be an army of 1,000,000 out there, and the Midianites roll out of their tent, and some Midianite rolls out, some guy's running by, and so he puts a sword in him. Well, it happens to be the guy next door, but it happens to be nighttime. And so the Midianites start killing one another off before Gideon ever comes down there, which chaos within the ranks is a method that God uses. And did you know he's going to use that one again? In the Gog-Magog battle of Ezekiel 38 and 39, which probably precedes right before the tribulation period, and which brings about really the end times as is portrayed in the scriptures. That's one of the things God's do, is he brings confusion to the invading force, and they begin to bump one another off. And then he uses an earthquake, he uses some sort of disease, which is dropping them like flies. So some of the stuff that God uses in the Old Testament is going to be used again in a future battle. At any rate, Gideon gets a great deliverance. Then there's Jephthah. Jephthah was the son of a prostitute. And he was not popular amongst the Israelites. In fact, they treated him very poorly because of his lineage. But Jephthah happens to be a very astute, capable military guy. And they know that. And so they come to Jephthah and they say to him, Jephthah, we would like to give you, like you to deliver us from the nasty Ammonites. And so he said, well, will you treat me nicely now? Be kind to me? Yeah, we will. Okay, I'll do it. Jephthah then goes to the Lord. And he makes a bargain with the Lord, a vow, and he says, Lord, you give me victory over the Ammonites, and I will give to you as a burnt offering the first thing that comes out of my door when I return from battle. And you think, what has he been smoking anyway? The guy is nuts. Who would make a vow like that? So the question is, why would you do something? And by the way, people say, and of course, who came out of the door? Remember? His daughter, his only child, comes out to greet him. And so commentators try to say, well, he would never have sacrificed his own daughter, so he dedicates. She kind of becomes a nun, off at the tabernacle. The word is a burnt offering. Now, there are a lot of things Jephthah didn't know about the law, and one is that making a vow that you can't keep, God made a provision for sacrifice to take care of all of that. So I think he ended up sacrificing his daughter because she came out to greet him. But you say, why would he do that? I don't know. But here is my guess. I'm going to give you my guess. And that is, his mother-in-law lived with them. And she was always coming out yelling at him when he came home from work. And so he figures, mom-in-law is going to come out to greet me. I think I'll use her as a burnt offering. Can't prove that one, mind, but don't write that down in your notes, okay? So God gives them great deliverance through Jephthah. The third, by the way, the reason why we're saying these three is that you look at the text of Judges, Shamgar gets one verse, some of these others get a couple of verses, but Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson, as you can see, get a number of chapters devoted to them. Samson, a guy who has taken a Nazirite vow and adhered to it, but he was a man that was given really, he had made the Marvel comics really good. He is a man of incredible strength and ability. And I mean, he takes the jawbone of a donkey and kills a bunch of Philistines too. But what God did use him for was to begin, the Philistines were the dominant people in that area. And what Samson does is begin to deprive them of their dominance. And that will end under Samuel. The chronology is that Samuel is alive and functioning probably as a judge when Samson's alive too. Some judges did in fact overlap. So we know that Samson had a problem with women, and that became his undoing, as you remember the storyline. So he was used by God, and he does appear, remember, in Hebrews 11, in the people of faith. He's there. But some of these guys clearly had feet of clay, though God used them, which, by the way, is an encouragement for us, since all of us have feet of clay too, that God can use us as he may desire. So in the book of Judges, these are the three that are focused upon. Again, when we come now to 1 Samuel, you have the next two judges. There was no centralized government at this time. And so the last verse of Judges is a very telling verse because it summarizes the period of the judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel, which, by the way, implies that whoever wrote Judges wrote it during the monarchy period. Most likely it was Samuel. There was no king in Israel. Everybody did what was right in his own eyes. So, the book of Judges is a rather depressing book for sure. So, this brings us, we don't need to, I'm sorry, we're going to bypass Ruth. Ruth is the only other book that really is found in the period of the Judges. And what Ruth is the purpose of Ruth, I think, is to show that there were some people who were keepers of the law, like Boaz, and who followed the Lord. But also it's there to show us the line of David. And so you can see some very interesting people in the Messianic line. Rahab will end up marrying Salmon from the tribe of Judah, and Rahab is Boaz's mom. Boaz will end up marrying Ruth, and they have a son, Obed, and Boaz is the grandfather of Jesse, who of course is David's father. So the book of Ruth gives us some of the line of King David. Okay? Okay. Let's take a little bit of a break, 5-6 minutes, do what you need to do, and then we're going to get started into the monarchy period. 1 Samuel. Amen. Hey! All right! Excellent, excellent. Now you can go back to sleep. All right, we have made amazing progress. Just think in the last half hour we covered over 3 centuries of Old Testament history. The cycle. So we come now to the book of 1 Samuel, which is a book of transition, transitioning from the major era of the theocracy to the major era of the monarchy. So when we look at the theocracy period, we have the book of Judges, and the book of Ruth, again, has just a bit of a tempers our attitude about Judges by letting us know that despite the general apostasy of the nation of Israel again and again and again, there were good and godly people that still took their relationship with Yahweh seriously and took his law seriously, Boaz being a classic example of that. I wish we could go into the book of Ruth. It's a fascinating story because us guys pick up some really good pointers in the book of Ruth about dealing with girls. So, I mean, we have found over the years that, remember Boaz, when he's kind of reaching out to Ruth, says, you know, it's lunchtime, come here and dip your bread in my vinegar. I mean, that is quite a line, you got to admit. And I've used that several times on my wife. Come here, baby, dip your bread in my vinegar. Not exactly, but it worked. It worked. Anyway. All right, enough of that. But it does show that the Word of God, the law of God, was taken seriously by people. I mean, look at Boaz, for example. He is generous, allows people to glean in his field, and that was after a long period of famine. I mean, if you had gone through famine, you're going to be very tight-fisted by nature. But he was not that way because he knew that as God gave him an abundance, he was to allow poor people to come and glean in his field. So whereas some of the other characters weren't necessarily sterling examples of spirituality, still you see evidence in them that they understood the law of God and did abide by it. So Ruth has some positive things. 1 Samuel is actually the theocracy period, with Samuel being the last of the judges. But he will be the one who anoints Saul as the first king, and he will anoint David as the second king, even though Samuel would never see David actually ruling as king. So the monarchy period, and I want to be able to start there after the exam tomorrow, the monarchy period of the 39 books in the Old Testament, 22 of them, I think it is, have some relationship to the monarchy period. And yet the monarchy period is not very well known by most believers, much less how many of the books, particularly the prophets, fit in with the monarchy, with the various kings. We're going to try to rectify that to a little bit, at least. Samuel, as it turns out, would be the last of the judges. So he was the civil authority over a large area, it appears, of the land. But he was also a priest. He was from the tribe of Levi, and he was God's spokesman. He was God's mouthpiece. Everybody recognized that Samuel was a prophet of God. And so he will occupy three of these Old Testament positions of prophet, priest, and judge. I personally think Samuel does not get the kind of credit that he should have. We usually don't have studies on the man Samuel. And yet, where did he find Israel as a judge? According to the cycle, he would have found them at the very bottom, not only of the cycle, but also in the descending spiral. And it was Samuel that brought the people back to the Lord. He, under his authority, territory that had been lost to the Philistines was now regained for the nation of Israel. And he was just unique as a man of God. And it's the same old story, as it were, where God uses individuals who are devoted to him. He usually doesn't go by means of committee. I taught at Moody Bible Institute for a number of years, and our namesake, Dwight L. Moody, perhaps you know his story, but Moody was a shoe salesman and in the city of Chicago. And he went to a young men's Bible study. And there one day, he says, the teacher doesn't remember this, but Moody says, the teacher said, the world has yet to see what God can do with an individual who is completely devoted to him. The world has yet to see that. And Moody exited the class that day and said, I will be that man. And from that point on, he was that man. And God took this guy without any real education, took him out of his shoe store, and made him the greatest evangelist in England as well as America of his time. God has always used people who are individuals who are devoted to him. Not necessarily committees, but individuals. And so may it be more and more true of you and me that our prayer, like Moody, is, I will be that kind of person that God can use, because God delights in doing that, in taking people who the world would not necessarily see as the movers and the shakers, and how he uses that individual for his glory. So Samuel's story is given in chapters 1 through 7. We recall that we hear it many Mother's Days about Hannah. And let's read the first verse or so of 1 Samuel. Now there was a certain man from Ramathaim Zophim, from the hill country of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jehoram, son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. Now, he is an Ephraimite. Well, what does that mean? Simply that he lives within the tribe of Ephraim. But he is a Levite. He is of the priestly class. But apparently what took place, and we can understand this, that if you were a Levite and you lived in the tribal area of Asher, you would be identified as an Asherite, or in this case, an Ephraimite. So don't be fooled. He's a Levite. It just said he happens to live in the tribal area of Ephraim. He had 2 wives. Well, we're not going to camp on that one very long. He had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children. Hannah had no children. Probably, can't prove it, of course, he married Hannah first, and Hannah proved to be barren, no kids for a number of years, and so he takes a second wife for his own lineage's sake. Now, can't think of too many places where having more than one wife turned out to be make for harmonious relationships within the family, and that was the case here, kind of like Rachel and Leah. Now, the man would go up from his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Well, why? Well, because that's the religious center of Israel, Shiloh. Now, we have some bad actors introduced next. The two sons of Eli happened to be the high priest. Hophni and Phinehas were priests to the Lord there. And when the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and her daughters. I mean, she must have had a whole gaggle of kids, lots of boys and lots of girls. And when the day came that Elkanah, but to Hannah, verse 5, he would give a double portion. For he loved Hannah, but the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival, however, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. It happened year after year. Now, understand that a childless woman in Israel, this would be very different than a childless woman in the United States of America. God, in the view by the Jews, was the giver of life, and of course he is. So if a woman did not bear children, something was probably wrong with her, secret sins probably in her life. So it was a real negative for a married woman in Israel not to have children. It was a sign of God's displeasure on her. And so you know, with that common way of thinking, that Peninnah really stuck the knife in and turned it again and again and again and made Hannah's life miserable, because I would guess that Elkanah tried to make up for all of this by a special treatment of Hannah. He gives her a double portion here, and that probably stimulates some antagonism and jealousy in wife number 2. So anyway, they go up to Shiloh, and in verse 8, Elkanah, her husband, said to her at Shiloh, at the tabernacle, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? You really want an answer to that, do you? Bad question, dude, bad question. He undoubtedly was extremely kind to Hannah, but the whole thing of not having children would have worn on her. Verse 9, then Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Now, if you look at chapter 3 and verse 15, you have Samuel, this is of course a little later on, Samuel lay down until morning, then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord. Doors of the house of the Lord? The doorpost? Well, all this is telling us is that the tabernacle is now basically a permanent structure. It's not going anywhere. They have built around it, and they have now provided space for the priests and storehouses and the kinds of things that the temple would have had later for the sacrificial system. So they go up, and you remember that Hannah is praying. Her mouth, her lips are moving. Nothing is heard. And Eli thinks that she's drunk and rebukes her. And Hannah responds and basically says, I'm not drunk, but I tell you what, I am depressed and I am down. I would like to have a son. So Elkanah and Hannah go back. It came about, verse 20, in due time that Hannah had conceived, she gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, Shem-el, meaning the name of God is what the name means. And so Hannah is delighted, and God then will bless her by giving her more children. But she did bargain with God that she would give Samuel to the Lord for permanent service at the tabernacle when he was old enough to do so. He is of the tribe of Levi, so that's not going out of bounds at all. So we are probably familiar with the story, but one night in the sleeping quarters at the tabernacle, Samuel hears a voice calling his name. He assumes it's Eli the priest, but it's not. And so that goes on several times until Eli figures it out that it's God calling Samuel. And so Eli instructs Samuel, if he calls to you again, simply say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." Well, that happened. And so God talks to Samuel, and he tells Samuel that, and I look at verse, anyway. So, the next morning, after God calls him, Eli says to him, "Did God talk to you?" "Yes." "What did he say?" And don't cover it up. What did he say? What is Eli thinking? Well, his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are two really evil young men. They are noted for their immorality with the women who would serve at the tabernacle. They are known for polluting the sacrifices by their behavior, by not doing what they should do. And Samuel told him everything and didn't hide anything from him. Well, what did God say? He says, verse 11 of chapter 3, "I'm about to do a thing in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears will tingle, and in that day I will carry out against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. For I have told him that I am about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons brought a curse on themselves, and he did not rebuke them." Again, they are openly, knowingly committing immorality, and they are polluting the sacrifices. Eli knew it, and he did not deal with it. So, with that, God is going to do that, and he's going to switch high priestly lines from Eleazar to of Eli was a descendant of Eleazar. He is going to switch it over to the line of Ithamar. Remember, that's the other son of Aaron. And so God is going to change the priestly line because of the sin of Eli and his sons. Verse 19 of chapter 3, "Thus Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fail." He took God's word seriously. "And all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba," that would be from the north to the south, "knew that Samuel was confirmed as a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again at Shiloh, because the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord. Thus the word of the Lord came to all Israel." So, in his role as God's mouthpiece, Samuel is going to eventually be used by the Lord to bring Israel back to the Lord. And land that was lost to the Philistines will now be regained again. Now, the Battle of Aphek, which we'll just visualize here on a map, became significant in later history because the tabernacle and the ark were affected by it. So, up here is Shiloh, in the tribal area of Ephraim. Elkanah and Hannah, Peninnah, and Samuel lived down here in the town of Ramah, but they would go up to Shiloh periodically. So, in 1 Samuel 4, 5, and 6, you have the account of what happens to the ark. The Philistines up here at a place called Aphek and Ebenezer face off against one another. And they do battle. And the Philistines whip the Israelites, and some 3,000-4,000 of them die, Israelites. They regroup, and somebody came up with the brilliant idea, let's go to Shiloh and get the ark. If we have the ark present, we can't lose. And so they did that. They took the ark of God from Shiloh. That was not something that should be done. And who carried it? But Hophni and Phinehas, the two wicked sons of Eli. So the second round of the Battle of Aphek Ebenezer takes place. And by the way, it's interesting that Israel's misplaced faith seemed to work out really good. Because when the Israelites, who had just been slaughtered, saw the ark, they had flashbacks to the day of Joshua and Jericho, when the ark led the people around Jericho. So they are enthused. And what's interesting, though, is across the valley, the Philistines learn that the ark of God has come. And they want no part of the ark of God. They know about that ark. And so they want to go home. Said, we don't want to go face, no one's ever beat that God. So their leaders said, you're going to stay here and fight, or you become slaves to the Israelites. So they decided they better stay and fight, and that they did. The result of round 2 of the Battle of Aphek Ebenezer was that 30,000 Israelites were killed. It was a slaughter. Then the Philistines were totally victorious. What they did was to get a hold of the ark. And so they now take the ark from Aphek Ebenezer, and now they bring it down to Ashdod. Ashdod is, and they're going to put the ark in the temple of Dagon, their god, because the ark is a trophy now. So, if you remember the story, Dagon, after they put the ark in, Dagon the next morning has fallen down in front of the ark like he's worshiping. Oh, the priests of Dagon think this does not fly. We got to do something else. They prop old Dagon back up again since he doesn't have the strength to get up himself. Next day they come down and Dagon has fallen down again, but this time he's lost his arms and legs. Now he's in bad condition. And they realize, you know what, this is not going well here. And so they decide, let's ship the ark off to Gath. And so they do that. And off to Gath it goes. And a plague takes place. You have people dying right and left with the plague. We don't want the ark here. Let's give it to the people we don't like up here in Ekron. the plague breaks out there. The ark has now become a hot potato. Nobody wants this thing, and they are trying to get rid of it. And then, in a most interesting way, the ark is then sent over to Beth Shemesh, just outside of Jerusalem, and there it will stay until David gets it, when he establishes Jerusalem as a capital. And he will bring down from Gibeon, where some of the tabernacle is located, he will bring them down and eventually unite them in the city of Jerusalem. He will put the ark in a special tent. There's no place for the whole tabernacle. But then when Solomon builds the temple, the ark and all of the furniture and of the tabernacle will be stored in the temple. So the tabernacle continues to exist, for a while. Now, here is a point that I think is important for us to realize. On page 41, the primary offices in Israel: priest, king, and prophet. So, okay. At Mount Sinai in Numbers chapter 3, the tribe of Levi was taken and the priestly line was established. And God committed himself to the tribe of Levi. So, what about the tribe of Asher becoming the priestly tribe? No, that was not possible. God committed himself to the tribe of Levi. And so, what happens if the priests go bad? What if you're stuck with them? That's what is the case. So, the office of priest is fixed, not to be changed. Then, later on, you will have the office of king. And once you get to David, the line of David, that is now the kingly line. Will God ever change it? Maybe the family of Azriel, whoever that is, I don't know. But anyway, no. God has committed himself in the Davidic covenant to the line of David. So these two offices are fixed, so that if there is corruption in the priesthood or in the kingship, there's not much you can do about it. So this brings up the third office of prophet. And the office of prophet was not related to a tribe. It was not related to any particular family. God would raise up prophets at his own discretion. And this is why when you're reading through the Old Testament, the prophet, as a general rule, is seen to be right on target. He's a godly man. He is serious about the law of God and serious about obedience to God. Why? Because God chose him. That's why. He doesn't come through a family line. So the one office in the Old Testament where the purity of the office is pretty much assured is the office of prophet. Now, the office of prophet began, according to Jeremiah 7, began with Moses, but the office of prophet becomes prominent in the days of the monarchy. This is where the prophets in great numbers begin to emerge in the national life of Israel, is during the monarchy period. So, prophet becomes significant basically at this moment in time, even though technically the office began before that. Okay. As we mentioned in our overview on our first day, the monarchy period, which lasts some 450 years, is divided into three parts. The united monarchy, the divided monarchy, and the single kingdom. So the united monarchy, and by the way, when we talk about dates, as I said before, like with scriptures, I'm not going to burden you with them, but these are dates that you need to remember because they are pivotal moments in the history of the nation. In 1043, Saul is made king, and there will be three kings that rule in the united monarchy time, that of Saul, David, and Solomon. Solomon dies, and the kingdom is divided because of the sin of Solomon and the foolishness of his son Rehoboam in the year 931. And so now we will have two kingdoms, Israel in the north, 10 tribes, Judah in the south, 2 tribes. (721) or thereabouts, the northern kingdom of Israel is taken captive by the Assyrians. And at that point in time, there just remains the one kingdom, and that of Judah. And Judah will last until basically 605, but we have 3 dates there, which we'll go into a little bit more. But in 605, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon comes the first time, and Judah becomes subservient to the Babylonians. It's not until 20 years later, 586, that he will come a third time and destroy the city of Jerusalem and the temple and end the monarchy period. Because during that 20 years, he allows a Jewish king to rule, even though that Jewish king is under the domination of the Babylonians. So in the big picture, the monarchy period is united, divided, and single. So where we enter now in 1 Samuel chapter 8 is with Saul being chosen as king. Both 1st and 2nd Samuel really are wonderful books containing just prize spiritual principles, but in a survey course, there's so much that we have to just bypass. So we're going to take a quick look at Saul, and then we will be done for the day. So where have we come? We're now here in the monarchy period. It's an extended period of time, and as I said, probably over 22 books of the Old Testament are in some way connected to the monarchy period. And so it is a period that is important for us to begin to get a good grip on it. So here we go. First question: was it God's will for Israel to have a king? Answer: yes. Yes, it was. Well, how do we know that? We know it from Deuteronomy, because God laid out what a king was to do and what he was not to do. So, Israel, as Samuel is now very old, he probably is not able to get around like he once did, and they recognize that Samuel is not going to be with us much longer. They do not want his sons being judges, because those guys are pretty corrupt. Interesting. They take bribes and all that kind of stuff. Samuel was anything but that. So godliness is not passed on from generation to generation. It's individual, isn't it? So they want a king. We want to be like all the other nations, they say again and again. So the first thing is the reason for wanting a king was dead wrong. They wanted to be like the Gentile nations around them. That's not a good reason. We want to be like the culture. So their perspective was wrong and their timing was wrong. This was not God's time for a king. Now, won't take time to read through this all, but I think I need to look at a couple of verses. Deuteronomy 17 Moses gives the basic guidelines for Israel having a king. So they did anticipate a king coming along here. So in Deuteronomy 17, in verse 15, you shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord God, your God chooses, one from among your own countrymen. You shall set as king over yourselves. You may not put a stranger or a foreigner over yourselves who is not of your countrymen. So a non-Israelite could not be a king in Israel. And then he talks about multiplication of certain things. We'll get to that with Solomon. Verse 18, now it shall come about when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests. So what they were, I have you read a lot, don't I? Can you imagine if I required that you write it out, page after page of Deuteronomy or whatever? But you know what? If you wrote it out, you'd know it a lot better than just reading it. So the kings, the guy before he became king, had to write out the Mosaic law code. And the Levitical priests were watching him to make sure he did it right. Why? Because if he's going to rule over God's people, he's got to know God's law. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life. Verse 20, that his heart may not be lifted up above his countrymen, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right or to the left, in order that he and his sons may continue long in his kingdom in the midst of Israel. Did you know that the framers of the Constitution leaned on Deuteronomy 17 for a number of the concepts that are there? For example, remember when Obama was president and they talked about his birth? Where did he come from? Was he an American citizen? And that was a huge thing. Where did they get that idea from? Deuteronomy 17. Where did they get the idea that the king was equal with everybody else and was under the law? They got it from Deuteronomy 17. A number of the things that are reflected in our U.S. Constitution come from Deuteronomy chapter 17. So they understood the value of what Moses wrote here, that it was to avoid the abuse of power. The king is under the law. He's not over the law. And we're hearing a lot about that today. No one is above the law. Well, that's true. But that comes out of Deuteronomy 17. So what the prophets would do, by the way, they didn't just prophesy. We don't have time to go into the prophets, but one of their main responsibilities, they were counselors to the king reminding the king of what the law said. That's what the prophets would do, among other things. So, Deuteronomy 17 is important. King could not be a foreigner. A foreigner would not know God's law. He was to write out the law by hand, so he would be familiar with it. He was under the law, and this was designed to curb the abuse of power. So, Deuteronomy 17 pops up several times in the monarchy period, as we will be seeing probably tomorrow as well. So, Saul, the people said, we want a king. We want to be like nations around us. We want a guy that we can see leading us into battle. So, I think God basically gave them what they wanted. Saul was not a godly man. He was not a mature man. He may have been some semi-religious and superstitious, but he wasn't of the caliber at all of David later on. So, in chapter 8, you have Israel demanding a king, and Samuel wasn't really happy about this. He didn't like this idea, but God said, we're going to give them what they want. And Saul, well, he began okay. I wouldn't give him an A for the course, but you know, he appeared to be sort of humble. He did bring a military victory or two, but he ended badly, and that's why David, before Samuel died, why David would be anointed as the next king. Now, his success was brief. His walk with God and as a king representing God's people was very brief. In the storyline, there were four, as you read, there were four distinct steps downward in Saul's decline. The first is found in chapter 13, and that is when Samuel did not show up before a battle. They had as a custom to seek God's favor via sacrifice before they went into battle. At the agreed upon time, Samuel wasn't there. And the result was that many of the people saying, no sacrifice, no battle, we're going home. And so many of the Israelite army began to roll up their sleeping bags and head for home. And when Saul saw that, he didn't seek the Lord. He said, I've got to do something about this. And he said, where's that sacrifice anyway? I'll do it. And of course, what he did was intrude sinfully and wrongfully into the office of priest. And God basically said, you know, you're done. Later, God said to Saul, I remember what the Amalekites, God, by the way, has a really, really good memory. I remember what the Amalekites did to my people when they came out of Egypt, how they attacked the rear guard there. And Joshua appears for the first time at that point where he now becomes the leader of the army. But the Amalekites need to be dealt with. So that's 400 years ago. So you're to kill everybody, take no spoils. It's kind of like a Jericho situation. You don't take the spoils of war. Well, Saul goes into battle, great victory, and for the most part, he kills most everybody, but he does save the king alive. And they did that. They would keep the kings alive because they were trophies. And in fact, what was kind of interesting, as Judges talks about it, they would have the kings, first of all, they'd cut off their thumbs and big toes. And the purpose was, it's very difficult to hold a sword without your thumbs, and there is a lack of stability, particularly in hand-to-hand combat, if you don't have your big toes. So they would cut off the thumbs and big toes, and they would have them at banquets. The kings they had defeated, they'd put them under the table and throw them scraps. The idea was, if you invited guys over to your house for dinner, and you look under the table, what are those 4 guys doing down there anyway? Oh, they're kings that I defeated. They didn't have trophy cases, so they had living trophies, and that's what Saul is doing. He wants to get a trophy. God said, kill everybody. That includes Agag the king. And kill all the animals. You're not going to take prizes from this war. He saves a huge number of animals. And Samuel comes out to Saul, and Saul sees him and says, "Ah, Samuel, I did what God told me to do." And Samuel says, I hear sheep bleating and cows mooing. Why is that? Oh, those. The people did this. Not me. The people did it. So that's Saul. Never owns up to anything. But he was disobedient to the Lord. By the way, remember that Samuel then takes out his sword and kills the king and cuts him up in pieces even. So then, multiple times in the book of 1 Samuel, David is chased all over the Judean wilderness as Saul tries to kill him, knowing full well that God has ordained David as the next king, and most likely understands he has been anointed by Samuel. The final step down is that he goes to the witch of Endor, a woman who's in the occult, in touch with demonic beings, to find out what he should do the next day in battle against the Philistines. And at that point, at the seance, as it were, Samuel appears. You say, well, was it a demon representing Samuel? No. The text says it was Samuel. And by the way, once Samuel appears, the witch is no longer a part of the whole thing. It's Saul, Samuel, talking back and forth. And Samuel wants to know, why did you disturb me? And well, God's not talking to me, either by priests or by the Urim. Well, here's the bad news, buddy. Tomorrow you're going to join me, meaning you're dying tomorrow. And that's, of course, exactly what happened, is that Saul and his son Jonathan and a couple other members of his family were killed, and the Israelites were slaughtered before the Philistines. A really unfortunate end to Saul. He was probably wounded in battle and then fell on his own sword. So anyway, in just a brief summary, the monarchy period is underway then with a less than memorable king in Saul. Okay, been a long day. We'll stop here, but we will pick up after class, or after exam tomorrow. The exam will be at 9 o'clock. It's mainly objective. You're not going to need an hour and a half. There is the one discussion question that's lengthy, a couple of short answer type discussion questions, but the rest are fill in the blank, true, false, that kind of stuff. So you should have ample time to do it. And then when you're done, you can disappear, but reappear at 10:30, and we'll start in again and work through the monarchy period. Now, if you have questions, ask me at dinner or now. Any questions about things as you're going through your notes, something's not clear, I'll be glad to try to clarify. Okay, have a wonderful time tonight. Hope you get a good night's sleep.
Thank you.